Hey AP researchers, this video here is all about correlational analysis, one of the methods available to you, but I think you'll also find this video useful as you're just considering the different methods available to you in the AP Research course. Now, this video, like all my videos, is all about AP Capstone. We cover topics related to AP Seminar and AP Research. This one is for AP Research, and it's all about how to do a correlational analysis. But before I dive into the details and walk you through an example, I want to just make sure you're totally clear on sort of how do you pick a method, and then what are the different components as you move through picking a method to gathering your data, and then of course writing your paper. So I think the first thing to remember is that there are potentially a lot of different methods available to you, and you might even find that more than one method works to tackle the topic you've chosen. So let's look at this chart here. It really helps break it down for us. The first place you want to start is picking your topic and then crafting a research question. Now, your research question is something that you should realistically be able to answer using a method, gathering data, and your research question should have variables that are actually measurable and specific. So once you've figured out your research question, the next step is to figure out which method do you want to use. Now, there is a ton of methods you can choose. You're also welcome to mix and match, but some of these methods that you see here are available to you and my students often use. Let's talk about a couple of them. First, we have content analysis. This is where you're looking at a piece of content and analyzing it in a methodic way. We have quasi-experiments, surveys and interviews, which are some of the most popular amongst AP research students because it's quite easy to fulfill the requirements of making something reproducible as well as something that is bringing new data and understanding to the field. Then there's correlational analysis, which is what today's video is about, but there's also a bunch of other ones, including meta-analysis, observational, acts, and performances, and all of this is really available to you. So you first have to figure out your research question, then you select the method that you think is best suited for gathering the data needed to answer your research question, and then you have to develop some sort of research instrument. Now, for a survey, pretty straightforward. Your research instrument is usually the questions, the Google form, the SurveyMonkey, whatever your tool you're using. That's usually what we mean by research instrument. But for correlational analysis, you often have to develop some sort of tool, usually in Sheets or Google or Excel, that has some predetermined variables, predetermined data that you're going to be analyzing, and that will end up being your data. So that is what today is about. It's how to build a effective correlational analysis research instrument, how to use this method in an effective way. But before we get into that, let's just take a step back and let's make sure we understand that not all methods are equal in terms of being able to answer the research question that you want to answer in your paper. So here are some students that I've had in the past, and I'd love for you to be able to predict the model that best suits each of these students. So let's talk about Rachel first. Now, Rachel wanted to take a look in her AP research paper about how being in a school surrounded by children of immigrants impacts how children of immigrants themselves feel about cultural identity and feelings related to their culture. Now, if you were recommending one of these methods to Rachel, which of these methods do you think would be best suited for Rachel? I'll give you a little bit of think time, and if you said survey and interview, you are right on. The reason why is you need to basically ask them, how does it impact their feelings, their identity? Now, you cannot observe that. There's not really going to be measurable data necessarily. You couldn't look at like graduation rates or something because that doesn't tell us about their feelings about identity and culture. So this is a classic example of a research question that really tells you, hey, I need to get inside the head of my participants. So we're going to select a survey and an interview. We cannot observe these things, so we have to actually ask and talk to them about it. Okay, let's take a look at another one. Now, Milan here wants to take a look at, does limiting access to guns reduce gun violence? Now, I might recommend this student gets a little more specific with their research question, but just for today's purpose, which method do you think is best suited for this? Let's think. We are going to look at limited access to guns, so laws, and then gun violence. We're looking at really two different data sets. Yes, you got it right. Correlational analysis. This is what today's video is about, and this is where we typically take two different data sets or more and we relate them to each other. Notice how different this is from the other research question where we're wanting to understand kind of what's going on inside someone's head. So of course we have to ask them. Here we just want to see a correlation between something that's limiting access to guns like a law and then actual gun violence data. If you want to look at more things related to AP research or get an overview of the course, I have videos about that. And I also recommend checking out the link in my bio. If you are a teacher teaching AP research and you want access to year-long curriculum, basically slides, handouts, everything you might need, there's a link in the bio where you can access that. Now, I show this to my students and I'd like to show it to you as well, but what do these three things have in common? Well, they're all tools. I'm showing you this because essentially, once you have a method, the next big question is, what tool am I going to use to collect my data? And based on the question that I have, that informs the kind of tool I need to pick. So for example, if my question is something as simple as how old are you, I probably want to just ask someone. Maybe a survey is the best way to do that because I can get the most amount of data. So my question is how old you are, thus I'm going to use a survey, and my data ends up being age. The instrument is what should be aligned with the data you seek. So knowing the data that you want is really, really important. Let's look at another one. How do you feel about being 17? Well, here I might want to do an interview because this is a longer form. I might actually want to sit down with someone and be able to have a little bit of a dialogue to get to my data here. Instead of just what age, a number, I want to know feelings about age, and interviews might actually be better suited here. Okay, let's look at another one. Maybe here my question is, how do Disney TV shows portray the late teen years? Well, I can't just sit down and ask you or I because we're not Disney TV shows. So I need to actually analyze some content. I'm going to watch Disney TV shows, and my data is going to be the plot, the dialogue, the filming choices. And I have to build some sort of schema and structure to analyze that in a methodic way. There's going to be another video on how to do content analysis, so I encourage you to check out my channel for that video as well. Okay, the key point I'm trying to drive home in this whole big opening is that the research instrument is the tool you develop to ensure that your data is going to align and actually be able to answer your research question. So, for example, if we were practicing this with correlational analysis, you might have two sets of data here, and if you're trying to figure out the relationship, it might go something like this. On one hand, I have a set of data that's related to the weather on certain days, and on the other set, I have a data that's related to ice cream sales. Correlational analysis is trying to find a relationship between sets of data. So I notice when the temperature is higher, there is also more ice cream sales. This is classic correlational analysis. Two sets of data, and what I've really done is I've figured out how these two sets relate to each other. Okay. So just to summarize, the research instrument is that tool you develop. That would be like I build a spreadsheet that has some columns for the temperatures and another that has columns for the sales of ice cream. And then that is going to be the data that I use in my paper to talk about conclusions. So we started by talking about, okay, first you need to figure out your research question. Based on your research question, there are right and wrong methods to pick. Once you have a method picked, you need to think about the sort of data you want so that you can build a research instrument that makes sense. Are you guys ready to see this come to life? In this next portion of the video, we're really going to spend some time now talking about how this would actually work in an actual example. So, step one, we're going to do some correlational analysis practice, and I'm going to use an actual topic that one of my students did a couple years ago. Step one, we want to start with our research question. So this student's research question was, to what extent does race play a role in an NYPD officer's likelihood of using racially offensive language? Now, notice how specific this is. This is a great research question because this is really filling a gap in the research. I can tell that just by how specific it is. It's focused on a place, New York City. It's focused on a type of offense that the officer might be doing, which is racially offensive language. But I want to also make sure I actually have this data. Luckily, New York City keeps a record of a lot of police misconduct, and I know for a fact that I have access to this data, and I'll be using this in our practice. So the first question, once you finish the research question, the next question is, okay, where can I find this data? Does it actually exist? This is often something that can be frustrating. You might be looking for a while, or you might know exactly where to look. But correlational analysis, unlike surveys, we don't gather data necessarily. We look for data sets that already exist, and we try to create relationships between them. Step three, once you've found your data, is you're going to be asking over and over what relationships exist, and do these relationships and do the data itself, does that really have the ability to answer my research question? All right, so those are your first three steps as you prepare to do a correlational analysis. Let's go ahead and practice this. Now, I'm going to share with you a tool that I've already used called the Correlational Analysis Rehearsal. And in this tool, you're going to see the research question, the raw data, and I'll show you the process of how we might organize it. Okay, let's go ahead and dive in with this example. Here I've created this Excel document or Google Sheets document, and in here I've already grabbed my data and I've put it here as raw data and organized data. I'll show you how I did this. First things first, I was able to access this lovely website called the NYPD files. This was published by ProPublica during the George Floyd uprising. I think this was around in 2020. And here I see that there was a huge amount of data related from 1985 all the way to January 2020 that showed all the different allegations and complaints against New York City police officers, and then they organized it nicely by the type of complaint. So force allegations, abuse of authority, offensive language. So for the sake of my research question, I focused in on offensive language related to race. Here, my data set was about 283 complaints between 269 different officers. I downloaded this data and then I saved it here. I actually copied a lot of it and pasted it into the document. I'm not going to show you that because it took a lot of time, but I ended up with this where I have the officer's name, the rank at the time of the offense, and then the officer's race, as well as the details about the complaint. So was this a male, female, what was their race, how old they were, and then I also included their the sort of ruling here. A lot of these are unsubstantiated, but there's a fair amount of substantiated, and then I just organized this by the year. So here's some of my data sets cleaned up, but this in of itself doesn't yet tell me, right? I'm looking for a relationship between whether race plays a role in an officer's likelihood of using racially offensive language. So all of the data here is examples of officers who've had complaints against them for using racist language. I want to now figure out, is there any trends in relation to the officer's race? Well, how can I do this? One way I'm going to do this is I'm going to count. Now, I could actually physically count. This isn't a huge set of data, but those of you who are Excel whizzes know that you can use the count if function. Now, if you like this activity and you're a teacher, there's a link to all the activities that you see, all the slides in the bio, so you can walk your students through something similar. But here I want to go ahead and actually do a count if to see which of these officers are doing these offenses. So here I'm going to actually organize the data by typing into my formula equals count if. I'm going to select the column, and then here I'm going to have it count for whenever the word white shows up. Now you'll notice I've put it in parentheses with an asterisk so that it's not looking for, it doesn't have to say just white. It can say white male, white female, but this parentheses and star make sure that, hey, if white shows up anywhere in this cell, count that as something. Let me go and show you how this looks if I was to do this from scratch. Okay, so let me show you how I do this from scratch. First, I'm going to create some columns. I'm looking for a couple racial groups here. I'm going to put white, I'm going to put black, and then I'm going to put Hispanic, and then I'm going to put other. This is unfortunately sort of a catch-all, but I don't think I'm going to see statistically significant data in this fourth column. Here, I want to go count if, and I'm literally telling it, hey, count if, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit my open parenthesis, and then I'm going to select here, scrolling all the way down, holding shift, and then clicking at the end of the range. There it is. Count if during here. I'm going to hit space, and now I'm going to build out what I want it to count. Quotation, star, white, star, quotation, enter. Oops, why did that not work? Oh, I think I need a comma. Yes, there it is, the missing comma. Now it is counted and it's seen white 56 times. Okay, let me go ahead and copy and paste here. Oh, but it's transposing. No, I don't want it to. I want it to stay on column D. I can easily fix that. And this time I want it to count whenever it says black. Okay, so 16 instances of black officers using it. And I'm going to do that one more time for here. I'm going to go ahead and copy my formula. And this time I'm going to go ahead and replace black with Hispanic and 26. Okay. Now, I noticed scrolling around there actually is no other, so I'm just going to remove that. All right. Now, I could continue to do this, but I wanted to show you from scratch sort of how I would put this together. And then here is the finished product. Now, here, I've put it together. This is a little bit different set of data. This is the full set of data here. And in the full set of data, I can show you that there's 120 complaints against white officers, 31 against black, 46 against Hispanic, and then 1 against an American Indian officer. That brings a total of almost 200 complaints. And that's the number of complaints by the race of the officer. And I've gone ahead and I've made a chart. Fantastic. Now, these are excellent things that you can put into your paper. Now, how did I make the chart? Well, if you go to it, you can see that the chart pulls data from these different cells, and that easily comes together. So here's how I might actually do that. I would select these, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit insert chart. And it's pretty easy. It knows what I'm looking for, and from there I can change colors and things. I chose to change some colors here so that it was super clear what exactly it was correlating with. But more or less, that's what I wanted to show you here in terms of how you go from a raw set of data to pulling out numbers and then, of course, creating visuals Here is the race of the person making the complaint. I pulled that out as well because I think both of these are helpful in answering my question of how does race play a role. So I can say that race plays a role in racially offensive language in regards to the officer and in regards to the person making the complaint. The big trend that I've now found by looking at my data is white officers seem to be the ones creating the most racial complaints, and the race of the person making the complaint most likely and most often is a Black individual. So here now I've really been able to answer my research question, and as I'm talking about this in my paper, I can then base this on sort of other research that's out there. I can involve more data sets if I want more results, but this right here, ladies and gentlemen, is how I went from a research question to picking a method, correlational analysis, to building a tool, this Excel document, to now having some data that I can use in my results section to really answer my question, relate it to the research that's out there, and ultimately get that 4, 5, or 3. Okay, I know that was a lot, but I think sometimes the hardest part about this class is just being able to visualize it. And so I hope this was helpful as you thought about using correlational analysis for AP research. As I close this video, I want to share just 5 core points about correlational analysis. Number 1, make sure your data is actually capable of answering your research question. You may have a really awesome research question, but if you don't have data that can answer it, you got to find something else. Secondly, reporting on others' data is not the same as exploring a relationship between variables. If there was a research article that already did what I just showed you and you're just reporting on that, that is not research with a big R. That is just you learned something new. Research, AP research, is all about you offering something new to the academic field that's not already known. So yes, this data has existed, but what you've done that's unique is you've correlated this data. You've brought it into relationship and you've discovered trends. Third, simplify and organize your data for ease of analysis. You saw how simple I was making it there. I was bolding things, color coding. You really want to make it super clear because often you're diving into really complex data sets, and half of what correlational analysis is is about is just making this easy to understand for your reader. Number 4, utilize Google Sheets formulas, formatting, classifying, and coding in your analysis. You noticed I wasn't counting things by hand. I'm using technological tools, and being able to use it and talking about how you built these tools in your paper is going to look great for the AP grader. Number 5, you don't have to create everything from scratch. In fact, find a mentor text or a similar research article that maybe has something similar that you could use. You can even borrow tools from other papers or other research organizations. And if you're adapting this tool to a new context, that's still fulfilling doing something new in relation to your topic. So don't be afraid to steal ideas or borrow or transpose things to make your research work. All right, that's 5 core points about correlational analysis. I've done this walkthrough. I hope this is helpful. If you like this video and it's helpful for you, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're a teacher watching this, I have all these materials available. You can see a link in the bio there. It will walk you through step by step with handouts, PowerPoints, everything you need to roll this class out for your students. And hopefully you can get some 4, 5s, 3s, or whatever would make you proud of all the work you've put into this course. Thank you and best of luck.